Our guest in the Fast Lane today is a real treat for me, as I'm sure he will be for many others. He's an absolute legend of Kiwi sport who achieved massive success here in Australia and the UK. He took the Kiwis, Queensland, Wigan and other rugby league teams to numerous titles in the 80s and 90s. Despite being knighted, he's a true Kiwi bloke who's changing the lives of many New Zealanders through his groundbreaking approach to education. He is, of course, Sir Graham Lowe, but we all know him better as Lowie. Welcome, Lowie.
Thanks very much, Simon.
How are you?
Really good, mate. Thanks for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. I have to say this is actually a bit of a thrill for me because even though I can barely catch a ball myself, I absolutely love rugby league, and some of my favourite memories involve some of your teams. So a little bit of a fanboy moment, I guess, for me, which is really nice. I think the epic State of Origin series that you won with Queensland is probably my favourite series of all time. And some of the Kiwis you've coached are absolute legends as well, amongst my favourite players. So we've got a lot to talk about, not a lot of time, so let's crack into it straight away if that's cool with you. And I guess the first thing I just want to ask you about, being an MTA podcast and obviously of particular interest to the automotive industry and MTA members, is just to sort of ask you about a little brush you had with the automotive industry yourself as a young man and perhaps could have taken you on a different career path. So do you want to tell us about that a wee bit?
Yes, Simon. Well, it wasn't a little brush, really. It was where I thought my life was going. I served my apprenticeship as when I wanted to leave school, I was desperate to get out of school, and my dad, like a lot of parents back in those days, and maybe still today, but my dad said, we're not leaving, you've got to get a trade. So I wanted to be a mechanic, and I rang around a few. In those days, you just had to look in the Herald, and there was piles of apprenticeship jobs available every day. And anyhow, I rang about this job as an apprentice mechanic, and the lady answering the phone said, "Oh, we're sorry, but that position's just been filled." And by chance, earlier in the week, I'd been talking to a fellow who married a cousin of mine, and I was telling him I wanted to be an apprentice mechanic, and he said, "You should be an auto electrician. They're the gentlemen of the motor trade," he called them. And it's a different trade, and it's going to be something that's very important in years to come. So I said to this lady, I can't. She said, I couldn't be a mechanic. And I said, well, what about an auto electrician? And she said, well, actually, we've got a place available at Hope Hickman on the corner of Cook and Albert Street in the city. If you go in there and ask for Mac, that's how simple it was. So I went in and asked for this fellow Mac, and Alan McIntosh his name was, and he came out and saw me. He was an older fella, and I started the next day.
Wow.
And so I served my apprenticeship as an auto electrician, and I just absolutely loved it. So then when I'd finished my time, I went over to Australia, and because I wanted to get it, I knew they had different equipment over there, particularly outside in the mining areas and places like that. So they also had a lot of American trucks and things that weren't in New Zealand at the time. So I went over and spent a few years sort of learning about the machinery and what was going on over there, and then came back to New Zealand. By the time I came back, a lot of it had come back over to was in New Zealand, and so I carried on as an auto electrician, and then right through till early 70, and then I started my own. It was Graham Lowe Car Electrics, I called it. And we were on the corner of Panama Road and Mount Wellington Highway in Otahu. And I had, a lot of fantastic customers, and that's where I thought, that's where I thought I'd be for the rest of my life.
Well, first of all, let me apologise for saying a brush with the industry. I didn't realise you had quite a successful career. So first of all, my apologies for that. Secondly, I'm sure all our auto electrician members of MTA will be absolutely thrilled to hear them described as the gentlemen of the industry, and probably the ladies as well now in this day and age, right? So I'm sure they'll be thrilled with that. Have you retained that interest in cars and automotive matters through your life? Are you a bit of a petrol head? Do you have a favourite car, that sort of thing?
I am. I'm not a petrol head. I probably don't take as much notice now as I used to. But I've always had that thing that if I needed to, I could go back into a workshop again. Now I'm well aware that the technology has really changed and all the testing equipment and things like that have changed. I actually have got a Tesla myself, and things have really changed along that lines like that. But the basics of I equals E over R, Ohm's law and all that sort of thing you learn about when you're an auto electrician. I absolutely loved the job, and I didn't think there was anything at all that could pry me away from that.
Right.
And it was just, by chance, really. I was shutting my workshop door one night, and just as I was shutting it, a fellow who I knew pulled up outside, and he said, "I've just come to see you. Is there any chance?" He said, "I'm going on a working holiday." And nowadays they call them OEs. And he said, "I'm going on a working holiday to the UK." Yeah. And I was wanting to see if you'd be interested in taking over the team that I coached last year.
Right. Well, just before we get to that, and sorry to cut in, but just briefly staying with the automotive theme, yeah. Have you had any cars, or do you have a car now that you've particularly loved in your life? Are you that sort of person, or are you more an A to B type guy?
Oh no, I still love my cars, and I suppose the favourite that I've had in the last sort of 10 years, I suppose, was a Land Cruiser, a new Land Cruiser.
Oh yeah.
And it was a fantastic car. It was a top of the range Land Cruiser, and they're too blinking expensive. But that was a great car. But I've had all sorts of cars along. The first car that I bought when I was an apprentice, the first car I bought, paid £40 for it. It was a 1934 Austin 7.
Wow.
That was my first car.
Oh,
and
right.
Then, it was a strange thing driving into the city. It used to overheat, the blinking radiator cap would fly off. Just cruising down the hill, but then I upgraded to a 1939 Vauxhall, and back in the day, then there was a lot of old cars here in New Zealand, and then I got to a Triumph Herald Coupe that was pretty flash in the day, and
was it a red one?
No, it was light blue colour.
Classy.
Yeah, so and all the time, like most of the electrical equipment on all those cars was Lucas, and there was some of the cars that were coming in, there was Bosch.
Right.
But we sort of, I did love the cars in those days, and going to Australia and getting the opportunity, seeing different sort of, the cars were a little bit bigger, obviously a lot of Holdens and Fords and things like that over there.
Have you jumped on the EV wagon yourself? You're an EV man, or still prefer the fossil fuel?
I've got a Tesla, got a Model 3 Tesla, so I never, and I'd like to say there was some big reason I got this car away from the fossil fuel type thing, but which is one night, one day we saw an ad come up on TV, and my wife and I said, "Oh gee, wonder what that's like, wonder what they're like," and then we went in and tried one the next day, and it was when Tesla we had some sort of rebate deal, I think, from memory. This is a couple of years ago. But just I couldn't believe what the car was like when I started driving. It was just really, I don't think I've driven all sorts of different cars, and for handling, and for acceleration and braking and safety and all those things that you need nowadays. It's pretty hard to go past those Teslas. They're fantastic.
Fantastic. All right. No, that's cool. All right. Well, we'll collect the check from Tesla later for that endorsement. That was some great free publicity for them. But no, fair enough indeed. Let's pick up the story again from where you were before. And sorry to cut you off at that point. And obviously, sport and rugby league in particular has been a massive part of your life. And you were a pretty handy player yourself in your younger days, weren't you? I don't know if this was the same time that you were running the auto electric business, or a little bit younger, but talk us through that evolution from being a handy player, promising player, and then the step into coaching.
Well, I think my mother thought I was a really handy player.
Right.
The selectors didn't. So I was just like everyone who played. I just loved the game. But during my apprenticeship, if it wasn't for my boss or my bosses at the time, I probably wouldn't have been able to complete my apprenticeship, because during the footy season, it seemed when I think back now, it seemed that every Monday morning I was missing for a couple of hours because I was at the doctor's or the hospital or something, because something was sprained or knocked around from the footy over the weekend. So, but I knew early on that I was never going to be a great player, but I just loved it. I kept playing as long as I could, and it wasn't until not long before I started my business, I stopped playing, because I just couldn't afford to get hurt, and I had no intention of being a coach. It wasn't even on the radar. It was just this fellow calling into the workshop one night as I was shutting the door and asking me if I'd considered coaching that. It was called the Odu 8th grade. The youngest was about 14 years old. The eldest was just turned 16. That was the age group that they were in. And so I thought, gee whiz, it was something just out of the blue. So I said, can you just give me a night to think about it? So anyhow, I thought about it overnight, and then I thought, so I rang him up and said, I'll do it. And so I bought myself a new tracksuit and a whistle and a clipboard and things that I thought coaches, needed. And the club said to me they trained at Murphy Park in Otahu, and they trained Tuesday and Thursday night at 6 o'clock. So that was basically all the instruction that I had, and I knew it was the Otahu 8th grade team. Otahu was the club that I used to play for, and so that's really the only knowledge I had of the whole setup. So I went down this first night for practice at the start of when the season was due to start, and I got there about 5:30, and I had my little workshop van that I had, a little mini van that was said Graham Lowe Car Electrics sign written on the side of it, and I went down to Murphy Park and waited around. They said 6 o'clock was when they started, so waited around. 6 o'clock came. There was nobody there. 6 o'clock came and went, and it got to about 20 past 6, I suppose, 25 past 6, and I'd noticed this old car parked on the Princess Street, I think it was in Otahu. It had been there since when I arrived at the ground. This whole car was there. So I thought I thought I could tell there was somebody in the car. So I decided because I thought, gee, I've mucked this up. I must have got the times or the days wrong or something. But I wandered down to this car and I tapped on the window. I could tell there was some kids in the car, and it was full of smoke, cigarette smoke. They're all puffing away in there. There was 5 of them. So I tapped on the window, and the driver wound the window down, and I said, listen, boys, could you tell me where Otahu 8th grade train? And one of them said, they train out here. And I said, do you know where the team is? And one of them said, we don't usually train on Tuesdays. We're the team, we don't usually train on Tuesdays. And I don't know what it was, Simon, but in that moment, my life changed, because a switch must have gone in my head, because I looked inside at these young boys, right, and I said, I'll tell you what, I need you to get 25 players down here on Thursday night, or I'm telling the club there's no team. And one of them said, what do you need 25 for? And I said, because you 5 are out. Wow. And then I turned and walked away, and I heard them swearing and cursing at me and whatnot. So anyhow, I turned up on the Thursday night, and it was, I don't know how many was there, over 20 of these young kids there, and a couple of those, 2 of those 5 boys went on to play for the Kiwis.
Wow.
And I often wonder if I hadn't tapped on the window, what may not have happened.
That's amazing. And did you take the team to the title? I mean, were they successful?
Yeah. We we just carried on. We were really, really successful side. That was the 8th grade that year. In the next 2 years, I coached 3rd grade, and we won everything in those years, and then reserve grade, and then the following 1977 and 78. was the premier grade. So we're talking a long time ago.
Yeah. But great progress though, and you had obviously discovered at that point this is what you really want to do, right? Was that in your heart at that point? Or you found your calling in life?
Well, I just loved it. What I liked, Simon, was I could see by talking to these young fellas, I could instantly see the improvement. But I still had my business, so I still was, I still had to, operate my auto electrical business, and it was quite funny because the guys, when I think now, how much time and money must have wasted, because the boys used to come around after school and after they'd knocked off in the afternoon, whatever, and come into my workshop, and by this time I'd got a new workshop in Moa Street in Otahu, so the boys used to come around, and I'll tell you a strange story, Simon. You can believe it or not, but it's absolutely true as I'm sitting here. So I'd have a blackboard up on the, this is before whiteboards. We had a blackboard in the smoko room.
Right.
We used to plan, because back in those days, so I'm talking in the 70s, and we used to plan that one of these days these boys would be playing for the Kiwis and I'd be the Kiwi coach, and this is what we'd do to beat Australia.
Wow.
And as it turned out, in 1983, a couple of those boys were playing for me, and that we did that. We still had the same calls for the moves that we planned years ago with. And
that's incredible. I actually wanted to ask you about the 83 series and team in a moment, but which were the players that went all the way through with you from there?
Owen Wright and Mark Graham.
Mark Graham, wow. Was he in that group that far back?
Yeah.
Wow.
Nicky Wright was another player.
Yeah, wow.
Internationals, yeah.
Man, Mark Graham would be my favourite player of all time, I think. What a legend he was. Just such a dynamic player, gentleman off it, just a fantastic player. Wow. And you've had a long association with him, obviously, but great player. Wow, that's an amazing story. That's incredible. And from motor, sorry, you go. So
I was still, I'm still an auto electrician. I'm still as an auto electrician, and that's how I still thought. I never believed for one moment that I'd be coaching the Kiwis or anything like that, because I'd never been a famous Kiwi player, and back in the day, basically that was the stepping stone. You had to have been a top player.
Yeah, right.
So I never thought it would ever happen. But anyhow.
I guess the stepping stone for you was Brisbane, right? Going to Brisbane and coaching over there and having success in Australia.
Yeah. That's really how it all came about, because even though it was only it wasn't full-time professional, I actually went to Australia and worked as an auto electrician and coached Norths in Brisbane. Yeah. And we won the premiership. They'd come last the year before I went over there, and we just missed out on the semi-finals the first year and won it the second year. But I was also worked as an auto electrician in those days as well. So it was just fantastic. And and I took Mark Graham over to Australia with me, and another boy from Otahu called Stan Napa.
Okay.
Who was a fantastic player, and one of Stan's sons was Dylan Napa, who had a great career with the Roosters.
Yeah.
And then went over and played in the UK, and he was a good player as well.
So when you went from Brisbane and got the Kiwis job, what was your reaction? Did you get a phone call and ask if you were interested, or was it an application process? How did you come to get the job? It must have been a dream come true when you did.
It was. Because I didn't think there was a pathway from where I was into a position as Kiwi coach. I'd never considered it, Simon. And just one day I got a call from one of the board members who asked me if I'd be interested in coming over to New Zealand to talk to them about coaching the Kiwis. So I said, mate, I'll be there tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so, to cut a long story short, that's pretty much what happened. I came over here and basically started. I think the experience that I'd had, particularly in Australia, it changed a little bit of the thinking. it also, by that time, I'd been in contact, because when I first started coaching a number of years before, back with Otahu, with the kids, with the young fellas at the 8th grade, I thought, what do you do as a coach? Because there was, there's plenty of coaches are fantastic people, because the volunteer community coach, they're just fantastic people, and they offer a lot of solutions to social challenges and whatnot throughout the country as well, because every Tuesday and Thursday night, these coaches of netball and cricket, and rugby and league and all that, they have the kids in the palm of their hand, and they're not only talking with them about the nature of the sport, they can talk to them about things about behaviour and all sorts of other things as well. So they're very, very special people. So I thought, what do you actually do? So what I did personally is I wrote a letter to all the big sporting organisations around the world. I wrote like to Real Madrid, I wrote to Australian cricket, I wrote to the Dallas Cowboys, I wrote to Canadian ice hockey, I wrote to Liverpool soccer, all the names that I could think of, and I wrote a letter. Basically, the letter was, my name's Graham Lowe, I coach Otahu 8th grade, what should I do? That was basically the letter.
Wow.
And to my absolute, so when I wrote that letter, that was 1973, that was the year I started coaching. And I don't know, I can't remember now how many months later, but I get a call, an envelope arrives in my letterbox, and in the corner it said Dallas Cowboys. I opened it up, and it was a letter from Tom Landry, the Dallas Cowboys coach. He may not have written it, it didn't matter, I still had this letter. But the thing is, Simon, from that time on, I then kept in regular contact, both on the phone and by writing letters, with Tom Landry from the Dallas Cowboys.
That's incredible.
And so he was basically with me on my journey for 10 years nearly, because that was from 1973. And in 1983, I was coaching the Kiwis and we beat Australia at Lang Park.
Indeed.
One of the first phone calls I made was to Tom Landry, the Dallas Cowboys coach, who was still there. He finished a couple of years later, but rang him to tell him, and so it was quite incredible, really. So,
and that is an awesome story. What was the best bit of advice he gave you? What was the one nugget that you remember that really influenced your coaching?
I think I can always remember him saying to me that he thought a lot of sport, particularly amateur sport, fell over because it was too focused on election rather than selection. Right. So there's a lot of amateur sport there's a lot of politics involved with the committees and all that sort of stuff. So that was one of the things he said to me. You've got to distance yourself from all of that, and because. And when you do, you begin to understand how lonely the position is. It's quite a lonely position being the coach, because you've got quite an influence coming in from parents who think that they're, Mary or Billy or whoever he might be should be in the team. And so there's a lot of things you learn to manage straight away. But he also sent me out quite a number of VH
videotapes. Yeah,
and I used to have to get them changed, because they have a different format over in the US. So I used to get them changed, but he sent me all sorts of things, and I just I'd probably talk to him about once every 3 or 4 weeks, and it was a great relationship. In 1984, I was still coaching the Kiwis then, and he actually sent me a note, or he rang me up, I can't remember, but he offered me for the Dallas Cowboys summer camp. Right. He offered me a role if I wanted to come over for 3 or 4 weeks to their summer camp.
Fantastic.
But as it turned out, the Kiwis were playing. We were playing here in New Zealand, Great Britain, and New Zealand hadn't beaten Great Britain in a home series here, and I wanted to make a bird of doing that. Yeah. And so I had to. Even though it was a unbelievable and tempting thing to go over just for a couple of weeks to experience the American thing with the Dallas Cowboys, I chose to go to Great Britain and have a look at some of the club football to get an idea of what we'd be up against. So. Which
is, I'm sure he understood, and it's a fair call. And let's just talk about 1983 and that era. And I went back and refreshed my memory of some of the players in the team back then, and the quality is just unbelievable. I mean, as well as Mark Graham, you've got Olsen Philippina, Dean Bell, James Luluai, Hugh McGann, the Sorensens and the Tamatis. I mean, just an incredible lineup of talent. I mean, was there ever a moment when you're coaching those guys and you felt overawed or out of your depth, or were you instantly comfortable in that environment?
I know I was comfortable. I mean, I was aware of the responsibility. I never felt overwhelmed by it. I suppose the time where you do feel that maybe overwhelmed is not quite the word, but I suppose anybody, when you're in a position where you've got the responsibility of New Zealand, you feel like you've got the weight of the whole game, or the country on your shoulders.
Yeah.
I suppose most have been in that position with whatever sport might be. There is a little bit of that, but you just have, you've got to just focus your mind on what you're doing and don't let that affect you. So I was lucky with all those players you mentioned. I mainly let them know what my dream was, and most times I didn't think they'd actually achieved or gone to the level that they were capable of. And so I, just tried to work on getting them all to the potential that I thought they might be.
No disrespect to any of the players that went before them or after them, but do you think that was probably the greatest collection of talent New Zealand Rugby League's ever had in the Kiwis?
Oh, I couldn't say that, Simon. That would be too disrespectful. But I certainly. It was a great group of players, and they played for one another. They certainly played for me, and they played for the game and for the country as well. But when I look now, particularly the way the game's set up, with the Warriors and the fantastic depth they've got, and also the number of New Zealand players playing for other clubs. That New Zealand's got depth now like they've never had before.
Sure.
Back in those days that we've been talking about, like that 80s and 70s and 80s and even into the early 90s, if you lost one or two key players, like for example if Mark Graham got hurt and wasn't
able to happen,
that was a big hole in your team.
A great group of players, but also a great group of personalities. I mean, you had people like Olsen Philippina and working on the garbage trucks and wearing his Kiwis jersey under his Balmain jersey, and all those stories that you'd have about great personalities in the team. Do you think the personalities have got a bit lost over time with the modern player? I mean, there's a lot more focus, I guess, on developing their brand and that sort of thing. But do we still have the big personalities in the game that we used to have in the 80s, do you think?
To be absolutely honest, Simon, I don't think there is. I mean, there's some fantastic players.
Yeah.
There's just as many good players, if not more now than what there was back in those days. But there's also a sameness. There's a sameness with because and that's probably to be expected, I suppose, because of they do their full time, just the training methodology of how they do it is far different to how it was. But being part time as they were back in the day, that when I was coaching the Kiwis, it allowed a personality to come in that maybe isn't allowed to come in nowadays.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would feel that way. And let's go to the big, probably the most famous and well-known series that you had with the Kiwis against Australia in the 80s. And I'll set the scene a little bit for the younger generation who might not be sort of aware of the context and the background to it. But it'd be pretty fair to say that Australia had a solid reputation as the big brother sort of bullying the little brother before that series. And that was something that I'm sure in camp you were determined to address and change that narrative. And it was made harder, I guess, by Australia winning the first test at home. It was one of those weird series where the first test was in Australia, the next two were over here. Australia won the first one in Aussie, and then absolute heartbreak in the second test when it looked like you had it in the bag, and I'm sure you've relived this moment many times, and then John Rebo scoring the the match winner right at the end of the game. I mean, that must have been a dagger through the heart for you and the players.
It was terrible. It was one of the few times in my life, I think, that where I actually thought, I just about thought a medical event had happened. You know, it was a terrible thing, but that was just from a selfish point of view for me. When I looked at the players in the dressing room straight after the game, it was a learning thing for me as well, because I also realised the mistake that I'd made as a coach and the path that I'd led them down was false, and I didn't know it at the time. It wasn't until I saw it happen, and I went into the dressing room, and they all looked at me, and they thought they'd let me down, and their families down, and the country down, and all that. To me, they couldn't have played any harder.
Yeah.
But I'd made the big mistake in isolating from the video. After watching the video of the first game, I isolated a number of occasions where some of our players in defence had a little bit of a bludge for maybe only 2 or 3 seconds,
right.
and Australia had taken advantage of those times. So I said to our players as part of the build-up for the second one, if you give 100% and don't allow those moments to come in, we will beat Australia. If you guarantee me that you'll give 100% for 80 minutes, we will win. Well, they did give 100% for 80 minutes, and we lost.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I learned myself, and that I had to apologise to the players about. And I think it bonded us tighter, and it made us better than ever.
And led to the third test at Carlaw Park, which is really the defining test of that series in a weird way, even though the series was gone. What everyone remembers from it, and probably the Aussies too, I suspect, is that third test. And you can talk us through it, but man, what a redemption moment that was. You can tell us the scoreline and the significance of it. But yeah, what a comeback that was.
Yeah, well, Simon, it was all based on that loss, but it was based on giving 100% only gives you the opportunity to win. It doesn't give you the right to win. So we knew that we had to, so it had been a big learning thing, but we had to get over. There was a lot of, I'd say, it was depression in the team. Particularly the first few days of the week.
Yeah.
I was no help to the team whatsoever. I was feeling sorry for myself, and I wasn't doing the job that a coach should do. And actually, Mark Graham came into my room, and Mark gave me a father talk actually, and I thought he was going to kick me in the pants, because that's what I needed, a kick in the ass just to wake me up and break me out of where I was. And then it's sort of the mood. So we mixed with the players, and we started getting it to another level, and we did a lot of our practice down on the beach at Takapuna. We just waited for the tide to go out, and we just practiced, marked out a field, and that's how we did a lot of the practice down there. And we started getting ready for that third game. But I knew that there was still that bit hanging over, that a lot of the players thought, we've really let the public down, and they must be really pissed off with us, and so we had our final training session at Fowles Park, Mount Albert's ground at Fowles Park.
Yep.
And I could see that we, even though everything looked right, I could when you're in that zone, you can sort of smell it if it's not right. I knew something wasn't right. So while the players were just finishing off training, I went up to the club rooms at Mount Albert, and I rang a couple of the radio stations, and I said, I'm going to bring the team down to Quay Street, down to the ferry buildings, and I want them to walk up.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, carry on.
And I said, because they're feeling down in the dumps, and all they need is a few people giving them some support, and I want them to show that support's there.
Yep.
So anyhow, radio stations did their work, and then I said to the team, listen, we're stopping, we're going to do this walk, and the players didn't want to do it. They said, because they thought everyone was dirty on them, and I said, you're going to be surprised. So anyhow, we got out of the van. We were in a couple of minivans, and we got out of the vans and started walking just from the bottom from Quay Street there, and gee whiz, we'd only got to Custom Street, and the crowds had already started them walking up. People were hanging out windows, and just it was a I can't describe what it was like walking up there, but with every step I could see the players growing. They were just growing and growing.
Wow.
And by the time we got up to the top, to the Civically, we went as far as the Civic. By the time we got up there, I don't care who we were playing, what we were playing, anybody in the world, I knew we were going to win it.
And before I give you the pleasure of saying that the score and the result, I'll just remind people listening, or perhaps tell them for the first time, that Aussie team was a great Aussie team. I mean, they had some of the best Kangaroos of all time. There was Wally Lewis, there was Mal Meninga, Steve Roach, Junior Pearce, a really quality side across the paddock. And on that day, you went out, and what was the score? I'm sure you have no...
18-0, yeah, and that flattered. Yeah. It was a good, but it was just the thing that while the scoreline, I'll always remember it, but the thing that I'll remember even more and it's just galvanised into my soul is the look on the boys' faces, the change from the total despair of 7 days before to how they were on this particular day was just. And I knew it would leave an imprint on their lives forever, so it was fantastic.
I think one of the reasons, it was fantastic, it was unbelievable. The whole country was with you at that time. And league was very much the poor cousin to rugby at that point too, right? So that was a real transformational moment for the game, not just the team and yourself. That was a huge step up for rugby league. And in many ways, the success in later years and decades started at that point because it just inspired a generation of other players and people to take an interest in the game.
Yeah, it was. I sort of want to be careful with what I say because it was. I think it was a turning point in many ways, particularly with the media, because the majority of the media were rugby union driven, and then fair enough. That's the national sport of the country. But I think that group of players demonstrated by their deeds something that was quite magical, and they did it with class and style.
Yeah, and I think people warmed to you personally because you were such a heart on your sleeve person. There was the stories about you breaking your teeth, from the tension watching a match and all that, which I assume was true, right? That's not just sort of myth that's grown up. And I think people really responded to that. And you as a coach, you weren't the sort of stony face sitting in the stands. You were riding every moment. Have you always been that way? You're a heart on the sleeve, emotional kind of guy?
Oh, well, yeah, I think you have to be yourself because everyone else is taken on. And in coaching, I think there's a lot of fashion. A lot of coaches follow what they see other coaches doing, but I always just did it my way. And particularly, footballers are not given credit in some ways with what they can sense. They're only judged by their football deeds. Yeah. But footballers can smell you out just like that if you're not genuine with them, and so the players were never in any doubt on exactly how I felt, whether I was happy or whether I was pissed off or whether I was disappointed or so I never tried to hide who I actually was.
There's a lot more we could talk about in your career with the Kiwis and with Wigan and Manly, but I know you're a very busy man, and I don't want to take up too much of your time because we're on the clock a little bit. So with all respect to your successes with those teams, it would be great if we could just talk about your time with Queensland a bit, because I know we want to talk about what you're doing now and some of the work you've been involved with since. And if we could just talk about that epic State of Origin series, your first one in charge I'm thinking of here, and what a absolute battle that was throughout the whole series. I actually remember watching the whole Mark Geyer Wally Lewis bust up. I was on the couch with my mum, who was this very proper posh English lady, and she was jumping out of her chair in outrage at Mark Geyer. She loved every moment of that. And for those who haven't seen it, please look it up on YouTube. Not just that moment, but the highlights of the whole series. Absolute intensity. How does winning that series rank for you in terms of your achievements, taking Queensland to the title?
I think that, Simon, I'm a proud Kiwi and representing a country and getting, if you can get the results, for your country, it's fantastic. But really, I was doing it for someone else's state. Even though I love it over in Queensland, I've lived a lot there. I'm a Kiwi, so I was well aware of the responsibility that I carried and the history and tradition and all that sort of stuff. I was at the very first State of Origin game in 1980, so I think that it's got to be, when I sort of reflect on some of the different times and with what was going on at the time, particularly I was really having a lot of health issues that had started to come into my life and affect what I was doing, and I was lucky to even be there half the time. I think it's got to be up there as the pinnacle, really, Simon. And to me, Wayne Goss, the Premier, they had a conference and made me an honorary Queenslander and all that sort of stuff.
And again, for people who perhaps weren't so familiar with State of Origin in those days, it was a little bit like the Kiwis Australia thing. New South Wales had a long history of serving it to Queensland, and Queensland was very much the little brother in New South Wales's eyes, and it was almost a little bit of a contemptuous relationship, wasn't it? New South Wales almost expected to roll up and win these big games, and I think that really stuck in the throat of Queenslanders, didn't it? There was a real point to prove when you amongst all the Queensland side. And one thing that amazes me looking back, again, I did a little bit of homework, and for all of those 3 games, each of which was an absolute arm wrestle, the same team. I don't think you made a single change to the 13 throughout that whole series, which is incredible now.
Yeah, it is. The players, the players are an incredible bunch of people, really, because they a lot of them are playing in quite distressed conditions, physically, but they try and hide it from you, because they don't want to be replaced. But I think it really proved to me what coaching is, that coaching is not a science, it's an art. Science backs it all up, but the actual coaching is an art. And I think that really, those views that I had about that sort of thing really hardened up in my thinking back in those days as well. But no, that was just tremendous. I mean, every single moment of it, the bit you talk about with Mark and Mark Geyer and Wally Lewis. The funny thing about that historic or that famous clash, you see them chest to chest on the field, and pouring rain, and Benny Elias is sort of in the background, and Benny had blood pouring out of his head from he'd had a head clash, and he'd been up. His mum had come down to the fence, and Benny had gone over, and she'd give him a hug. It was all happening, but that moment there happened right on half time with Geyer and Wally sort of chest to chest and screaming at one another. So I was down in the little player bit next to the tunnel. That's where I was watching the game from. So I went out onto the field and basically got them to break up, because it was right on the sideline, and get up into the dressing room. So all the players had exited and gone out into their dressing rooms. New South Wales was on the left and we were on the right, going up the tunnel. And so I walked up with just behind Wally and Mark, and they're still yabbering at one another, giving it to one another, verbally going up there. And as we got to the top, our room was on the right and theirs is on the left. I'm trying to break them up, and I said to Wally, get in the dressing room. I might have said it a little bit coarser than that.
Yeah.
But and then so Mark said something to me, I said something to him, and a red mist came over me. So I went to have a swing at Mark Geyer. This is in the blinking tunnel. And Mark could see what was happening, so he has a swing at me. Wally grabbed me by the back of the collar. Nice. And pulled me out of the way, so nothing happened. No one touched anyone. So Mark gets put into his dressing room, So I go into our dressing room, and then I had to say, calm down, fellas. You've got to. Oh,
That's incredible. And for people who don't know, Mark Geyer would be, 6'4", and incredibly broad shoulders, a real tank of a man. So, wow, that would have been an interesting matchup. Because you were more the Wally Lewis height, right? Yeah, wow. What a series. Very quickly, but just on that series, one last quick question before we move on. But what was your take on Wally? Because, I mean, he was a man that Kiwis were kind of fascinated with, New Zealanders were fascinated with. There was obviously a love-hate thing there when he was in the green and gold, but you got to know him pretty well. You obviously coached him at Queensland. And so what was your take on Wally in the end? Good bloke?
Oh, a fantastic guy. He's one of the best people that I know, that I've ever met. He's one of the few players that could totally dominate a game and totally change the direction of the game. Such skill, but he had a toughness about him. He was really tough. Really, he not only had all those silky skills, he had a toughness about him on the field that was quite incredible, really. But just a fantastic man, a fantastic person. He's still a great friend of mine even till today, and I see him during the Origin series every year, and often in other bits and pieces beyond that as well. But no, a great fella and a close, personal, good friend.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I've always wondered, I always had this little theory that just a tiny little thing that gave him the edge was, he's quite for those that don't know Wally, quite a stocky guy, right? He's quite a sort of a bit of a barrel body. I don't think you'd be too offended by me saying that. And his jersey always was like a second skin on him. It was so tight. And I always thought that was part of the reason why he was so hard to tackle, is that nobody could get a grip on him. He was like this little solid tank pushing through the defensive line. And I always thought that tight jersey, that was part of his success. But
yeah, well, he was like, he's 6 foot and over 15 stone. So, he's a big guy, and the main reason he couldn't get tackled because he was just so tough and so he was so explosive. Just
the acceleration was incredible, wasn't it?
Yeah. But it's great even thinking about it, Simon. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, let's move on. But before we leave coaching completely behind, has coaching sort of given a few lessons that you think transfer outside of sport, like to people that might have their own business here or listening to this, or people that are on their career path and wondering how to get ahead and get more out of themselves? Are there lessons from coaching that you think apply to the business world and to personal growth?
Oh, absolutely. I see little, a coach is a teacher, coach is a manager, coach is a lot of things. But I suppose, like management and like leaders and like foremen and things like that, some it comes easy to them. Some handle it quite. The ones that and some struggle with it. They might, and can be at any level. Can be at any level. I think that if you are one of the people that might be struggling with it, usually. The good ones do some research and try and improve themselves, but never be afraid to ask for help. Yeah. I think that's the big thing. And you see too, and sport's a great example because it's a reflection really of what we do in life and what we do in other things. And I think that there's plenty of examples of coaches who are struggling and don't get out of the rut they're in because they don't ask for it. They just try and, they think they are in a position that they have to be the one making the decision, making the call all the time, and they're reluctant to ask for help. And we can see the same thing happen in many businesses and things, and councils or governments or whatever. Leadership is leadership. Whatever jersey you're wearing or whatever uniform you're putting on, you've got to put a leader as a person who people look forward to come up with the plan and install everyone's in the proper position and getting the most effect for whatever skill they might have. So there's a lot of things involved, but I do think the most important thing is be yourself because everybody else is taken.
Yeah, very good advice.
you've got to look inside your own, what your strength is and what you believe in. And if you find you're struggling, be honest with yourself, be honest with your team. And, quite often the answer is in the team. So you can look for the solution just by asking for feedback.
Yeah, yeah. Tell us about your work now with the Lowie Foundation, and the work that you're doing with people who have challenges with literacy and numeracy. And you've worked with young Kiwis, and you've worked with prison inmates, and it's without wanting to preempt, but it's linked to sport to find success in that field. So tell us about that.
Well, I believe that I could see quite early on in the piece that sport had its own language. And once I started sort of, I suppose it was sort of once I got to Australia and coaching Norths over there, when I started to think, gee whiz, this is what I want to do. This is, I'm actually going to be a full-time coach, because that's when I started to become full-time in those days. But I thought sport offers a language that's quite unique, because you can see countries around the world that are in all sorts of conflict, and yet they'll play a game of tennis against one another, or they'll play soccer against one another, or they'll play what. So sport has a platform that I think provides a language that people can understand. So once I'd retired, I'd sort of, these things started forming in my mind. And I was also at that period starting to have a lot of health issues. I'd had heart attacks, and I'd had, brain hemorrhage, and really, really serious life-threatening things. And so it made me, I think, looking back on it, Simon, in many ways, coaching and the language of sport actually helped me through it. So once I got to the stage where I had to stop coaching because of my health, it was quite a difficult thing to cope with, because at that stage I was only in my 40s, and I was coaching Manly in Sydney, and I was coaching Queensland still at the time. And I thought that's what I'd be doing forever. Anyhow, these strokes and bits and pieces started happening, and I had to step out of it. So I was quite angry in myself for a while. I was quite bitter, and it was hard to explain. And I've sort of blotted a lot of it out of my memory now. But it probably took me a couple of years to come right, to get my head in the right space. And then I started thinking about all the fantastic players that had played for me, many who had come from really difficult and distressed and underprivileged backgrounds. They'd really sport had got them, helped them through. So I thought, I want to, if I can, those areas that they've come from, I want to try and use what I've learned in sport to provide other opportunities. So I started having a good think about it, and I realised there were a lot of people who were slipping through the cracks of education, and there was nothing there to help them once that had happened. So I thought, there's a different way to learn, because I knew more from myself. A lot of people, if you put two doorways up, and on one doorway it says education and the other one says sport, many young people will go through the sport one. They'll ignore the education. So what I did was I put sport there, but then I had a U-turn behind it that went into education, because I'd realised that I'd had, in a strange way, I'd discovered these 12 principles which were at the core of all the coaching that I'd been doing. There were these 12 things that were always there. And so with some help from some educationalists and people who understood what I was trying to get at, we decided to go to an area that was disadvantaged and get a group of young people and put them through what was at that stage NCA Level 2 literacy and numeracy. But using my 12 principles, the tutors would weave the literacy and numeracy through those principles and just see what happens. So anyhow, with the collaboration and help from the police up in the far north in Kaitaia, and Kaitaia College and North Tech, we used their tutors. We got 20 young kids that were, youngest was 16, I think, from memory, 16 to about 18. And the tutors from North Tech, I sort of got them to understand what I was on about with these principles. And there were a lot of naysayers. A lot of people thought, "Oh, this will never work." Anyhow, the course was the first course we did was, I think, 22 weeks long. The first one. This is back in this is 2013. It might have been. It was around about then. Quite a while, right?
Yep.
So we ran this course, and I got told, "Oh, well, they won't. Attendance is the big thing. No one will turn up." We had 100% attendance and 100% graduation. Everyone passed.
Yeah.
And the point of difference was these 12 principles, which were sport related, and we used sport unashamedly as the hook to get them involved and get them excited.
It's been incredibly successful. You've expanded it into the prison up there as well, right? You've done the same program with inmates up there.
Yeah, well, we've been through the majority of the prisons within New Zealand, and we're still doing it now. And in actual fact, I'm in Rolleston Prison on this coming Monday with the first course of 2026. It's down at Rolleston, and the following week I'm in Nafa up near Kaikoura. That's where we first started up there. Yeah. So we're in prisons all around the place, and we have fantastic success.
Is there a story? Is there a story that sort of springs in your mind of one person that's been through the course and it really changed their life, and it's just a story that's stuck with you?
Yeah, well, I can't talk too much about that, but yeah, particularly like the men in prison to see. I mean, it's not a popular topic that people like talking about, but
sure.
I'm in a privileged position in that I've been on the sideline at Wembley with 100,000 people singing to me. It's 8 minutes to go and we can't be beaten. We're ahead 27-0 or whatever it was, and all these people singing to me, and the feeling that you get and that when that happens, you can't describe it. It's just something in your soul and in your heart is something really, really special for you to cope with. It's a feeling of pride that's really hard to describe. Well, I've also sat in a room and seen 9 men inside prison graduate in foundation studies, level 2 literacy and numeracy, NCA literacy, and the pride I feel seeing these 9 men get the reset. I feel it's just the same, exactly the same as sitting on the sideline. It's just because the course now takes 18 weeks. It's a 17, 18-week course, so it's full time for them, and to see where the level that they start from, and then what they finish with, I'm just so really, really proud of it, because I can see and feel the bond through the eyes of what these men and women have been through.
That's awesome. That is really, really awesome. How do people find out more about it, if it's something that they want to know about, or if they know somebody who might benefit from working with you?
I've probably let myself down a little bit there because we've never had a website, and I'm not on any social media or anything like that, but there are ways, I suppose, if they ask enough people, they would find out. I'm 80 years old this year, so I've got no intention of stopping. But I know I'm at the stage where I want to go to something else, so I want to extend it. And I actually, if I got granted a wish, it would be that these 12 principles that I have from my coaching, that I can childrenify them, bring them down into children's language and terminology, and maybe have a children's hero, and get them in all primary schools, because they're so simple in what they are, but they're important because they don't only cover, they cover all sorts of things. The first one is a plan, and you have to have a plan with whatever you do. The second one is about what is a winning team. So what does a winning team actually mean, or what does a good family mean? What does a good business mean? So a good business, is that something does it mean you have more market share than the rest, or if you're in sport, does it mean your team gets more points than the opposition on the scoreboard? I actually personally think that's the easy part. I think the easy part in sport is to get more points than the opposition. The hard part, the real hard part, is developing the persistence and the pride and the teamwork and the humility. Those sort of values, they take a long time for people to grasp and understand the importance of at times. So I think the points on the board are they're just the easy things. It's the pride and persistence and teamwork and things like that. They're the virtues that really count and show us what a winning team or a good organisation or a happy family, what they actually are.
Yeah, well, I certainly had a read of them, and I thought that they had a very wide application beyond the work you're doing, and certainly amongst in all schools, like you say, I think, and families too. I actually thought there was a lot of very good advice in there for families. Are you happy if anybody who's interested in more information gets in touch with me and I can pass on their details to you or something like that? Are you happy with that?
Yeah, of course, yeah. I haven't got a magic wand or anything like that, and I can't turn a cat into a dog, but I can, I've really come to understand and accept and believe that the old-fashioned values are still the most important thing, and those old-fashioned values were right at the core of all my coaching. I was leaving. I had an operation on my brain, and I had a brain hemorrhage, and I'm lucky to survive from it, and I'd been in a coma, an induced coma for a long time. And anyhow, we were leaving the hospital, and it was at the Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney, and I wanted just to go down to the nurses' station to thank them, because I've been in a coma for a couple of months, and think, what do they do? What do people do when you're in a coma? How do nurses, how do they keep you going? So before I left the ward, I just wanted to go and thank these nurses, and I wandered down. There's 3 or 4 of these young nurses just sitting at this little station in the ward there, and I went to say thank you to them. And as I went to say thank you, I broke down and I started crying like a big sook. And I thought, gee whiz, surely there's got to be something else to say. Like when we finish this, we say thank you. Or if I give you a cup of tea, you say thank you. Or if I give you a chair or something, you say thank you. These people had saved my life, and all I could think of was thank you. And it made me realise that those old-fashioned values are always and always will be the most powerful thing. So if we can get our children in particular understanding how important thank you and please and all these old-fashioned values are the most important thing, and that's why they're really special to me. They're the heroes of my life. That one of the heroes, nurses, because they remind me of the old-fashioned values. So I suppose as I've gone through, I've gone from the hard edge of footy, you got to do this, and kicking people's ass to get them trying to do things and driving the heck out of them. I've come right through the other end now, and I understand and accept, and I know nothing will ever be more powerful with all the technology we've got and all the. I know my own twin boys, how smart. Luckily they got their mum's brains, but they're just so super smart, both of them. But all the things they're learning, I know will never beat saying please or saying thank you. These old-fashioned values are just still the key, I think, to us being a good society.
And I think a lot of people would agree with you. I certainly do. I'm totally on the same page as that. And can I say, you look actually in great health. It's really good to see you in such robust form. And hope you can keep doing the good work you're doing for a long time. But have you got some other plans with us you can share? Are you thinking you might sort of ease off the pedal a wee bit, or what's next for Graham Lowe?
I'm 80 years old, and I actually. I've got a bit of a daft thing in my mind, to tell the truth. if I'm serious about it, because I'd love to be coaching something when I'm 80 years old, just doing something totally different. And it may not be rugby league, it might be rugby union, or it might be, I don't know, soccer, or it could, I don't know. But, age is just a number, and there's many occasions, my wife has been counselled on quite a number of times that I may not make the day or make the night or the afternoon or whatever because of whatever situation I've been in, with heart attacks and bits and pieces. So, I'd like to be 80. I'm 80 later this year, and I'd like to be 80 years old and coach it.
There you go, everybody listening and watching. If you have a sports team that needs a coach, a legendary coach, drop me a line. I'll pass it on to Graham. You never know, the magic might happen. Could be from any team. That would be an absolute fairy story. That would be incredible for everyone. Lowie, look, I'm very conscious we've taken up too much of your time already. You've got other things you need to go and do. Thank you so much for joining us. I've loved this chat. It could have been 3 times as long for me. But I really appreciate your time. I'm sure everybody listening will appreciate it as well. So thank you very much, and all the best for the future.
Thank you, Simon, for the opportunity to come on, and to everybody listening and watching. I hope the thing that I'd like you to get out of it is you cannot beat old-fashioned values. I mean, I know I'm not stuck in the past, and there's neat things that are happening, but the old-fashioned values and respect for one another is something really, really important. And that's what we're globally known for in this country. I'd just like us not to forget it.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, all I can say to that is thank you. Thank you very much, Lowie. All the best, mate.
Thank you very much.
Some great stories and some great advice as well. Now, look, if you enjoyed that episode, first of all, check out the other ones in the series in the Fast Lane. We've spoken to some really fascinating Kiwis. Drop a like, drop a comment, make sure you listen to the next episode, and keep an eye out for MTAs in the Fast Lane podcasts. Thank you very much for joining me.